Have you ever wondered how a humble Jesuit from Argentina became one of the most influential spiritual leaders in the world? In a time of global uncertainty, one man's journey from the streets of Buenos Aires to the hallowed halls of the Vatican has captivated both Catholics and non-Catholics alike. I'm going to take you on the remarkable journey of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the man we now know as Pope Francis. But this isn't just another biography. This is the story of how an ordinary person with extraordinary conviction managed to break centuries of tradition and reshape one of the world's oldest institutions. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just who Pope Francis is, but why his papacy represents such a pivotal moment in history.
Dezember 17, 1936.
In the working-class neighborhood of Flores in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Mario José Bergoglio and Regina Maria Savori welcomed their firstborn son into the world. They named him Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Neither could have imagined that this child would one day be known to the world as Pope Francis. Jorge was born to Italian immigrants who had fled Mussolini's fascist regime. His father worked as an accountant for the railways, while his mother managed their household of 5 children. His grandmother Rosa played a particularly important role in his upbringing, instilling in him a deep Catholic faith from an early age. "My grandmother was the one who taught me to pray," Francis would later recall. "She left a deep imprint on my life. She would tell me stories about the saints, and she had the ability to make God close, very real and present."
Growing up in mid-century Argentina wasn't easy.
The country was experiencing significant political turmoil, swinging between military dictatorships and unstable democratic governments. This political backdrop would profoundly shape young Jorge's worldview and his understanding of power, justice, and human dignity. Despite his later reputation for intellectual brilliance, Jorge's early education was fairly ordinary. He attended a technical school where he received a chemical technician's diploma before finding work in a food science laboratory. Nothing about his early career suggested a path to priesthood, let alone the papacy. But life took an unexpected turn when, at the age of 21, Jorge experienced what he describes as a profound moment of divine calling. While passing a church, he felt compelled to enter and found himself in confession. This experience changed everything. Something stirred within him, a vocation that would alter not just his life, but eventually the lives of millions. Jorge decided to enter the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, a religious order known for their intellectual rigor, missionary zeal, and commitment to education. He began his novitiate in 1958, taking his first vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience 2 years later. The Jesuit formation is notoriously demanding, and Jorge's was no exception. He studied humanities in Chile, then returned to Argentina to earn a degree in philosophy. He taught literature and psychology while continuing his own studies in theology. By this point, you might be wondering what distinguished the young Bergoglio from countless other dedicated priests. What was it about this particular Jesuit that would eventually lead him to the chair of St. Peter? The answer lies partly in the turbulent times through which he lived. As Jorge was developing as a priest, Argentina was descending into one of the darkest periods of its history. The infamous Dirty War saw a military junta seize power and embark on a campaign of state terrorism against suspected political dissidents. Thousands of people disappeared, were tortured, or killed. And the Catholic Church's response to these atrocities was mixed at best. Some church leaders actively collaborated with the regime, while others risked their lives to protect the persecuted.
Wer dit Vater Bergoglio stand in this Moralkruzible?
This question has been the subject of intense scrutiny and debate. As the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina from 1973 to 1979, he held significant authority during some of the worst years of repression. Critics have accused him of failing to speak out forcefully enough against the junta, and specific allegations were made that he withdrew protection from 2 Jesuit priests who were subsequently arrested and tortured. Jorge himself has always maintained that he worked quietly behind the scenes to save many lives, hiding persecuted people in his seminary and helping others flee the country. What's clear is that this period left deep scars on Bergoglio and shaped his understanding of how power can be abused and how institutions, including the church, can fail the vulnerable. It's a lesson he would carry with him throughout his career. After his term as provincial ended, Bergoglio's star continued to rise within the church hierarchy. He completed his doctoral studies in Germany, then returned to Argentina where he served as a spiritual director and confessor. In 1992, Pope John Paul II appointed him auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires, and by 1998, he had become archbishop of the same diocese. As archbishop, Bergoglio began to develop the pastoral style that would later define his papacy. He was known for his simplicity and humility. Rather than live in the ornate archbishop's residence, he chose a simple apartment. Instead of using a chauffeur-driven limousine, he took public transportation. He regularly visited the poorest neighborhoods of Buenos Aires, the villas miserias or slums where many priests feared to go. The shepherd must smell like the sheep, he would often say, emphasizing the importance of clergy being genuinely immersed in the lives of those they serve. In 2001, Pope John Paul II elevated Archbishop Bergoglio to the rank of cardinal, bringing him into the highest echelons of church leadership. But even with his red cardinal's hat, he maintained his simple lifestyle. When traveling to Rome, he would wear second-hand clothes given to him by retired priests. Then came 2005, a pivotal year in the Catholic Church with the death of the charismatic and globally influential Pope John Paul II. The College of Cardinals gathered in Rome for a conclave to elect his successor. Though it's against church law to reveal the exact proceedings of a conclave, multiple sources have confirmed that Cardinal Bergoglio emerged as the main challenger to Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who would eventually be elected as Pope Benedict XVI. According to these accounts, Bergoglio received the second highest number of votes, making him the runner-up for the papacy. But his time had not yet come. He returned to Argentina and continued his work, never expecting that fate would give him another chance at the chair of St. Peter. For the next 8 years, Cardinal Bergoglio led the Argentine church through challenging times. The country was recovering from a devastating economic collapse in 2001 that had left many Argentines impoverished. Bergoglio became an outspoken advocate for the poor, often criticizing both government policies and unfettered capitalism for creating social inequality. He also began to show his progressive side on certain issues, standing against discrimination of people with AIDS and expressing compassion for marginalized groups, though he remained firmly conservative on matters like same-sex marriage and abortion, in line with traditional Catholic teaching. But history had another surprise in store. In February 2013, Pope Benedict XVI shocked the world by announcing his resignation, the first pontiff to voluntarily step down in nearly 600 years. Once again, the cardinals gathered in Rome for a conclave, and once again, Cardinal Bergoglio found himself at the center of discussions about who should lead the 1.2 billion member Catholic Church. On March 13, 2013, white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel chimney, signaling that a new pope had been elected. Cardinal Jean-Louis Tauran appeared on the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and made the announcement, Habemus Papam.
We have a pope. Georgium Mario Bergoglio.
The crowd fell silent for a moment. Many had expected one of the better-known European cardinals to be elected. Then came the name he had chosen, Francis. It was a revolutionary choice. No pope had ever taken that name before. It signaled immediately that this papacy would be different, as Saint Francis of Assisi was known for his radical commitment to poverty, peace, and care for God's creation. When the new Pope Francis stepped onto the balcony, he did something else unprecedented. Before giving the traditional blessing to the city of Rome and the world, he asked the crowd to pray for him and bowed his head in silence. It was a powerful gesture of humility that set the tone for what was to come. From the very beginning, Pope Francis broke with many papal traditions. He refused to live in the lavish apostolic palace, opting instead for a suite in the Vatican guesthouse. He replaced the papal Mercedes with a modest Ford Focus. He carried his own bags, paid his own hotel bills, and made his own phone calls. These might seem like small gestures, but in the context of the Vatican's centuries-old pomp and ceremony, they were revolutionary. They also resonated deeply with a world increasingly skeptical of institutional power and wealth. But Francis was not just about symbolic gestures. He quickly set about the difficult task of reforming the troubled Roman Curia, the Vatican's administrative bureaucracy that had been plagued by scandals, infighting, and resistance to change. He created a council of 9 cardinals from around the world to advise him on reforms, signaling a more collegial, less Rome-centered approach to church governance. He overhauled the Vatican Bank, which had been tainted by corruption allegations. He streamlined the process for marriage annulments, making it less bureaucratic and more accessible to ordinary Catholics. Perhaps most significantly, he took bold steps to address the sexual abuse crisis that had devastated the Church's moral authority. He met with survivors, established new procedures for accountability, and defrocked several high-ranking clerics found guilty of abuse or cover-ups. We need to remember that even one case of abuse would be too many, he stated firmly.
The wounds of abuse never disappear.
On the world stage, Francis quickly established himself as a global moral leader whose influence extended far beyond the Catholic faithful. His first major trip outside Rome was to Lampedusa, an Italian island that was the destination for many African migrants seeking entry to Europe. There, he condemned what he called a globalization of indifference to the suffering of refugees. Climate change became another signature issue for Francis. In 2015, he published Laudato Si, Praise Be to You, the first papal encyclical devoted entirely to environmental concerns. In it, he linked care for the environment with care for the poor, arguing that the same mindset that exploits the earth also exploits vulnerable people. Here, coming to you from my little slice of paradise in the mountains. The sun is setting behind me, casting this golden light across the valley, and I just had to sit down and finally share this journey with you all. If you're new here, about 13 months ago, I left my apartment in the city, sold almost everything I owned, and moved into this cabin you see behind me, completely off the grid, running entirely on solar power. A lot of you have been asking for this video for months now, and honestly, I've been putting it off because I wanted to have a full year of experience before I shared my complete, unfiltered truth about what living with solar is really like.
No Instagram perfect moments, no glossing over the hard parts.
Just the real deal, what worked, what failed spectacularly, and everything I wish someone had told me before I started this journey. Before we dive in, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button and notification bell if you want more off-grid content. I post new videos every Wednesday about sustainable living, and trust me, after the year I've had, I've got stories for days.
Allricht, let's jump into it. So, my solar setup.
I'm running a 5.8 kilowatt system here, which consists of 16 panels mounted on the south-facing portion of my roof. When I was planning this system, everyone told me to overestimate my needs by at least 20%, and honestly, that might be the single most valuable piece of advice I received. If you're thinking about going solar, especially fully off-grid like me, write this down: whatever you think you need, add more capacity. You'll thank me later.
Let me walk you through my complete setup.
I've got those 16 panels connected to a charge controller that regulates the power coming in. That feeds into my battery bank, which is the heart of the system. I went with lithium iron phosphate batteries, not the cheapest option up front, but after comparing the lifespan and performance against lead-acid batteries, it made financial sense for the long run. I've got 20 kilowatt hours of storage capacity, and then an inverter that converts the DC power from the batteries into AC power that runs throughout my cabin. Now here's where things get real. When I first designed this system, I spent hours calculating my estimated power usage. I made spreadsheets listing every appliance, every device, how many hours a day I'd use them.
I felt so prepared.
And then reality hit. Those meticulously calculated estimates?
They were way off.
Not because I did the math wrong, but because living off-grid fundamentally changed how I use electricity. I remember my first week here. It was July, sunny and hot. The system was generating more power than I could use. I was feeling pretty smug, running my laptop, charging my phone, even using small appliances without a care in the world.
I thought, this is easy. What's also Fuß about?
Then came 3 cloudy days in a row, and suddenly my battery bank was dropping faster than I expected. That was my first reality check. The truth is, living with solar isn't just about installing panels and batteries. It's about developing an entirely new relationship with electricity. You become intimately aware of every watt you're using because you're the power company now. That awareness changes your behavior in ways I never anticipated. For example, I've become obsessed with the weather forecast. Is it going to be sunny tomorrow? Great, that's laundry day.
Cloudy for the next 3 days?
Time to be extra conservative with power. Before solar, I never thought twice about running the vacuum, doing laundry, and charging all my devices simultaneously. Now, I'm constantly aware of my power budget. One of the biggest adjustments was learning to time my electricity use with solar production. In an on-grid house, you use electricity whenever you want. With solar, especially off-grid, you want to use power when the sun is shining. I do laundry at noon now, not in the evening. I run my power tools during peak sun hours. Even something as simple as charging my laptop, I plug it in midday instead of overnight. Let's talk about winter, because that was my biggest challenge by far. I moved in during summer, when the days are long and sunshine is abundant. Then November hit, and suddenly my daily solar production dropped by more than half. The sun sits lower in the sky, the days are shorter, and in my location, there's more cloud cover in winter. Plus, I had snow covering my panels several times, which meant climbing up on the roof to brush them off. Not exactly the glamorous off-grid life Instagram shows you. December and January were the toughest months. I had multiple stretches of 4 to 5 days with minimal sunshine, and that's when my battery management skills were really put to the test. I learned to be religious about checking my battery levels and ruthless about eliminating phantom loads, those devices that draw power even when they're off. Let me tell you about my first major system failure, because it taught me so much. It was mid-January, after 3 days of heavy snow and clouds. My batteries were down to about 30% capacity, which is lower than you want to go with lithium batteries. I was being super conservative with electricity, using just essential lights and keeping my phone charged. Then I made a critical mistake. I forgot that my water pump, which pulls water from my well, is one of the biggest power draws in my system. I took a shower, and right in the middle, with shampoo still in my hair, everything went dark. My system has an automatic shutoff to prevent the batteries from discharging too deeply, and I had triggered it. So there I was in a pitch-black bathroom, with soap in my hair, fumbling around for my emergency lights.
Not my finest moment.
I ended up heating water on my wood stove and finishing my shower with a bucket. After that incident, I installed a small backup generator. I was originally determined to be 100% solar, but the reality is that having a backup power source is essential for off-grid living in my climate. The generator isn't something I use often, maybe 10 to 12 times over the entire year, but having it for those extended cloudy periods has been a literal lifesaver. Another major lesson I learned was about appliances. When I moved in, I brought my regular residential refrigerator from my apartment.
Big mistake.
That thing was an energy hog. 3 months in, I invested in a high-efficiency DC refrigerator designed specifically for off-grid systems. It uses about a quarter of the electricity, and that single swap made a huge difference in my daily power budget. Same story with my water heater. I started with a traditional electric one, and it was draining my batteries like crazy. I switched to a propane on-demand water heater, and while it's not as eco-friendly as I'd like, the reality is that heating water requires a lot of energy. Sometimes you have to make compromises in off-grid living. Let's talk about my daily routine now that I've been at this for a year. I've developed habits that would have seemed bizarre to my city-dwelling self. Every morning, the first thing I do is check the weather forecast and my battery level. That information determines my entire day's activities. Is it going to be sunny? Great, maybe I'll vacuum, do laundry, use my power tools for that project I've been working on.
Cloudy?
I'll focus on activities that don't require electricity. I've also become incredibly conscious of phantom loads. Most modern electronics draw power even when they're turned off or in standby mode. My TV, microwave, even my phone charger, all these things slowly drain power when plugged in. I've installed switch strips throughout the cabin so I can completely cut power to devices when I'm not using them. It's a small thing that makes a big difference in conserving energy. Cooking has been another area of adaptation. I love to cook, but many kitchen appliances are energy intensive. My electric kettle, toaster, and coffee maker all draw a lot of power. I've shifted most of my cooking to either my propane stove or my wood stove in winter. I even bake bread on my wood stove now, which is something I never imagined doing before moving here. Speaking of the wood stove, heating has been a completely separate challenge from electricity. My cabin is mainly heated with wood, which means I spent a good chunk of last fall chopping and stacking firewood. It's physical work, but there's something deeply satisfying about heating your home with wood you harvested yourself. The wood stove also serves as an emergency cooking surface and, with some clever setups, a way to heat water when needed. Something I didn't anticipate was how much I'd come to love the quietness of my solar system. There's no noise, no hum of electricity, no mechanical vibrations. When everything is turned off at night, the silence is profound. After years of city living with a constant background noise of appliances, traffic and neighbors, the silence here was almost disorienting at first.
Now, I cherish it.
Let's talk costs, because I know that's what many of you are curious about. My entire system, including panels, batteries, inverter, charge controller, and professional installation, came to just under $42,000. That's a significant investment up front, no question about it. I was fortunate to be able to use some savings and a small inheritance to fund this project. The return on investment is complicated to calculate since I'm off-grid rather than grid-tied, but factoring in what I would have paid for electricity over the expected 25-year lifespan of the system, plus the increased value of the property with a solar installation, it makes financial sense in the long term. The battery bank was the most expensive component, coming in at about $16,000 for my 20 kilowatt-hours of lithium iron phosphate storage. That might seem like a lot, but when you consider these batteries should last 10 to 15 years with proper care, compared to maybe 5 to 7 years for lead-acid batteries, the cost per year of ownership becomes more reasonable. One expense I underestimated was the auxiliary components, things like wiring, conduit, breaker boxes, monitoring systems, and all the small parts that add up quickly. I'd recommend adding at least 15% to your budget for these items. Maintenance has been surprisingly minimal so far. I clean the panels every few months to ensure maximum efficiency, and I monitor the battery health through my system's app. Long term, I expect to replace the inverter once during the life of the panels, and the battery bank will eventually need replacement too. I'm setting aside a small amount each month for these future expenses. Beyond the financial aspects, I should talk about the learning curve. I am not naturally technical. Before this project, the extent of my electrical knowledge was changing light bulbs and resetting circuit breakers.